I thought it would be a good idea to show you how I do my doodles and what I've learned over the years, tips and tricks on how to draw faster or how to do more realistic drawings and more cartoony drawings. And I just wanted to share some tips and tricks and show a real quick design here. Hopefully you'll find this useful when it comes to doodling in your journals. So I decided to go with a frog, and I have this stock photo as a reference, and I will be doing let's say more realistic sketch of it and then a more cartoony version of it, just to show the difference and to go over some tips about how to do this. And the goal here is to make it as easy as possible. My first tip is to follow the classic method, which is to look at the image, examine it a little bit, and to observe what kind of shapes you see on this image, and just start to do a real quick drawing of that, and then to refine it with more details and more specific shapes. Let's say the first shapes that I see as soon as I look at the image, just to have a base sketch that we can work with. This won't be a realistic sketch, it's more like doodling and maybe even make it cute. I do prefer to make cuter designs. The best tips that I can give, other than this basic technique, which is the most important, is to try not to care too much, because sometimes we get stuck in our head and we want to make something perfect, and we think that as soon as the pencil hits the paper, it's going to look amazing and realistic and perfect. But that's definitely not how it is. It takes a lot of changes and erasing and going back in, and that's okay. And to me, that was the toughest part, because as soon as I made a sketch, I would just immediately feel disappointed. So I really had to work hard to be able to accept this simple rule, which is to not care much. So basically, to just do it, don't put too much effort in it, in the first sketch at least. And definitely get rid of the idea of perfection. That has no place in our lives, anywhere really. So perfection should not even be in our dictionary. Just throw it out the window. This is not what we are doing here. And that might come like later on, but again, it's never the ideal, it's never perfection. So this one is more like a psychology tip, but it's crucial when it comes to drawing. The other tip is that you have to try and keep this first sketch as light as possible. I used to have a problem with this. I used to make really tough lines and I couldn't erase it afterwards. It was more final, and that's why I would get disappointed so fast, because it just looked like a mess and I couldn't erase it, I couldn't fix it. So try to keep it as light as possible. This pencil is probably not the best. This is HB2. I think this is more like a hard type of pencil, so this is not a good choice for sketching, but this is what I have. So, and I really don't usually do this, so that's why I don't have the equipment for it. I usually either use this one or this mechanical pencil, which I think this one is a bit softer. I would say the same, pretty much the same. But any pencil would do, really, anything you have at home. Just try to be as light as possible, so you don't make anything that is more permanent. And that will allow us to come back and erase things and make it as close to what we want as possible. Because at this stage, a lot of mistakes will happen, and that's okay. We need to make peace with that, basically. We need to accept it as part of the process. and really just go for it. If you're seeing mistakes that you have to erase and go back and fix it, you're doing a good job. You have to connect it. If you're making mistakes, that is a good sign. So if you connect it to rewarding yourself and saying good job because this is the first stage and I have to make mistakes, then you will be more willing to go through the process and you won't have such a negative response to the mistakes that you make in the beginning. Also, it doesn't really have to be exactly the same. This is more like doodling. I don't do professional art on it or anything like that. I only draw and doodle just for my journal. Usually I wouldn't even go for anything realistic either. This is something that I'm not really used to. I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes, just to show how you can quickly create the shape of the subject that you are drawing. Again, this is not even that accurate, the one that I'm doing, but I just want to show the process here. So it's a lot of going back and forth and defining and redefining the shape until you get something that you're happy with. And again, this is the very first stage, which is just the basic sketch. Already it's obvious that this is a frog, so we are on a good path here. Usually everything that I sketch ends up looking more cartoony than realistic, which is fine because that's just my personal style as well. And I would never really go for realism. It's never something that I wanted to do. It's impressive when you see realistic paintings or hyper-realistic, but it's just not my personal preference. I do prefer doodles and sketches like that are more focused on telling a story or conveying some sort of message or just as information. Let's say if I was studying frogs, I just find that way more interesting and kind of makes me feel like a scientist, like observing and documenting nature. I love that kind of style. That's why I love doodling in my journal. Sort of simulates that scientific method, and I'm very interested in that. So now I would start erasing and just recreating and just resketching until I get something that I'm more happy with. It looks more like a frog and more like my image here. And again, because this was just the first stage, I might even erase the whole thing, right? I'm not going to do that now, but if I didn't like it, I would just erase the whole thing, and that would be okay because you can still see the first sketch when you erase. So that gives you, again, some guidance on how to do this, even if you erase the previous sketch. Now I start to go over the lines that I actually like, making them a little bit more permanent, let's say, and more defined, because I've decided that I already like it, so I want to keep it the same shape that I created already. And I also refine my shapes here. And again, this is not a final stage. This is just the stage where I refine my shapes and make decisions as to what to keep, what I like, what I don't like. Obviously, my sketch looks different than the image, and that's fine. I'm not going for anything realistic. So this is the stage where I would start creating more details, but this is pretty much my sketch. Now, I could choose to go over this with pen, because that's what I usually do, that's my style. So I wouldn't go any further with the pencil because At this stage, I would just erase the whole thing and go over it with a pen, but this is it in terms of sketching. And I'm happy with it. It's not perfect. Perspective is not the same, but to me, this looks like a frog. So I am happy with it at this stage. I don't mind it. If I want to keep it as a sketch, I might do more details with the pencil to make it look more realistic, let's say. But I'm happy with this as it is. So maybe this was not the best example because the shapes were not really defined to begin with, but you can definitely start with more basic shapes. So if we could do like a circle and a box, let's say here, to get like the bulk shape of it. So this is the goal here, to do first the big shapes, smaller shapes here, and to sort of connect the lines and start refining the sketch. So this would be the first stage, and then the rest of the stages that we showed before. So for doodles, we definitely need something more simplified. It will not have this many details. It would be stylized, meaning that the anatomy is not accurate. It's just, we're just using this as a reference, but it's so much simpler than the actual more realistic sketch. So for a cute frog, I would basically do the eyes. Again, we can start with shapes. I'll do big eyes like that and a big body like this. Nothing realistic, as simplified as possible. I just want to show again the method of creating shapes before we connect them to create a more complex shape. So here you can see the difference between something more stylized that you might see in cute illustrations or sticker form. So I would much rather put this in my journal as a sticker than this one. This one looks a bit scary to me. I wouldn't. It looks nice as a sketch. Maybe if I also have like a description here about the frog, and maybe I have some arrows here explaining the anatomy of the frog, and it's more of a technical sketch, let's say. This can definitely have a place in your journals if your style is more serious and more of this scientific method or style, which I really love, the encyclopedia style, or those technical drawings that have, let's say, anatomical parts of the frog, like they would draw the leg of the frog separately and have notes about that. Again, it has more of a serious vibe, let's say, to it. So yeah, I would definitely not go for this in my everyday life, maybe in a specialized notebook, but for my journal or my planner, I much rather have something cute like this that you can dress up, you can create different outfits for this character. This is more like a character than a frog, basically. But definitely, I love being able to draw this specific style as well, because it is useful, and I do use the same methods for both drawings. So that's important to know the basics of it. And if you know the basics, you can then decide what you would like to do or what your personal style is. So yeah, just to go over my tips, number one is to observe and study your reference. Always work with references, that is very important. So first, study your reference, look at it, look at the big shapes, the smaller shapes, leave the details out for the first part of the process. Then you go on to create the basic shapes, and at the same time you try to keep it as light as possible with your pencil. So you're not doing this, right? You're not going in really harshly. You try to do very light lines here, and they don't have to be perfect, right? And that's tip number 3 or 4, I don't remember, probably 4, is to forget about perfectionism, throw it out the window. It does not belong in this process. Forget it. It's just shake it off, basically. It doesn't belong here. Keep it very light, create the basic shapes that you want to create. And here we have the basic shapes, right? We have triangles, we have circles. You can even try this just for practice. So you can practice doing circles like this. And again, it's not even a full circle. You have gaps here, and that's fine. All you're trying to do here is to create a guide for yourself. So as soon as you have the basic shapes, you go in and you refine your shapes. At the same time, if you don't like something, you just erase it and you go over that and you work on it until you're happy with the shape. And then finally you decide, when you reach this stage specifically, you decide where you want to go with this. You can either keep it as a sketch and keep doing details with pencil, or you can choose to erase it lightly. So you erase lightly like this, and you can go over it with a pen, and as soon as you go in with the pen, you erase again. After the pen is dry, you erase again so you cannot see the lines anymore. You can go over it with oils, with watercolors, with anything that you like, markers, anything that you prefer. So yeah, that is the process that I follow usually, and I really hope you found this helpful. Don't forget, this takes a lot of practice. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Forget about perfectionism, and most importantly, have fun with it. Enjoy the process. It's fun. It's like meditation to me, and it can also be useful when it comes to decorating your planner or your journal. So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed this, and if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you in the next one.